So we saw this last time, right? So we looked at the kind of probably approximately correct the pack learning paradigm, right? And essentially the pack learning paradigm has these two parameters. One is epsilon, which is probably small, right? This is a true error. And the second quantity is the high probability bound, right? So with a very high probability, we can say that the test error is going to be less than equal to epsilon, right? And in order to be able to say such a bound, we have a sample complexity result, right? So this M, which is like the minimum number of parameters required, right? So minimum number of parameters required, not parameters, sorry, minimum number of samples required to ensure test error is less than epsilon, right? Or alternatively, maybe another way to say it is that the difference between the test error minus the training error is less than epsilon, right? With probability 1 minus delta, right? So this is basically M, and we want to give a bound on this quantity, right? So this is a sample complexity result. Okay, so essentially we kind of saw this trade-off between these two aspects, right? So we have the generalization bound, and then we have the sample complexity, and this gives this kind of nice variance, kind of biased variance trade-off, right? So this is something like the generalization bound which we saw, right? So we have essentially the test error is less than equal to the training error plus this quantity. Okay, so this quantity, this is basically a theoretical result. So what this means is that this result actually will hold with high probability. So theoretically, you can show this is kind of one of the few theoretical results that you can actually show in this setting, which is very cool, right? Because if you can show a theoretical result like this, then it's math, right? So math is not going to be, you know, correct in some cases, or you know, going to be kind of incorrect in some other cases, right? So unlike empirical results where you can say that, okay, maybe my model works under certain conditions, right? Maybe certain conditions I observe that in practice my model does not work as well. This is not a result like this, right? As long as we can actually get this quantity, I mean, as long as the number of hypotheses is bounded, right? And as long as we can, we basically have the number of training points M, and we have these two quantities, we have this delta, right? We can get a generalization bound like this, right? So this says that, as assuming, of course, okay, so kind of one important caveat is that both, so like for all of this to hold, or actually for any of these results to hold, the test and the trained data points belong to the same distribution, same underlying distribution. Right? And of course, you also require that the samples are IID. So IID-ness and basically IID, right? So IID means they are independent and they are identically distributed. So these are the critical assumptions that are required. Apart from this, we don't really make any assumption, right? All the other assumptions are made in the theorem. So we only assume that, okay, H here is bounded. If H is infinite, then obviously this upper bound will be vacuous, right? Because this quantity becomes infinite if the H is infinite, right? So as long as H is finite and we can kind of get this delta and this epsilon over here, we can actually show this kind of generalization bound. So this is pretty cool, right? Because this is the only quantity that we know. We know the training error. We don't really know the test error. Okay, we can estimate the test error by actually in practice getting, you know, certain test points, right? But then there's always this question that, okay, what if my test points are too less, right? Or maybe is it really going to generalize? So a bound like this will actually give a guarantee that, okay, you know, it's probably likely that this will generalize well because, you know, this quantity is small. Okay, so just a recap again, we basically had this result. This was shown in 1988. And this result basically says that with finite hypothesis space, right, the true error the probability that a true error is larger than epsilon is goes like with e raised to minus epsilon n, right? And this is what we use to get the sample complexity bound. So this bound basically, this bound was okay. So like this and this, both of these are in the case where you have like zero training error. Okay, which term in the X equation bias refers to? The difference. So the bias. So the bias is basically this quantity. Sorry. So in this quantity, right? So this is the okay. So this quantity is actually the bias, and this quantity is the variance. Yeah. Okay. So this is a sample complexity. We kind of saw this kind of again, kind of building upon this equation itself. This was in the case where you have like zero training error. If you have zero training error, then you actually get a bound that essentially has this term to be zero, right? So this term becomes zero. So you just have a term like this. In fact, there's no square root. You just get that epsilon test is less than equal to 1 over m times something, right? So this would basically give something like this. Epsilon test is less than equal to 1 over m log size h plus log 1 over delta. Okay. So this is the bound that turns out when you don't, when you know that the training error is zero, right? But when the training error is not zero, then we have this more general bound. Okay. So I'm just giving context. We kind of saw all of this in the last, in lecture 14. Okay. And yeah, so this was the kind of pack bound setting where we don't have zero training error. So this was the result where we what we had towards the end, right? So m is greater than or equal to log size of h plus log 1 over delta divided by 2 epsilon square. And this comes from the Hofding bounds, right? And this basically gives this kind of kind of sample complexity, or actually the generalization bound. So this is actually called generalization bound, a bound on M. Like this is the sample complexity bound. Okay, so I'll just kind of, so this bound is basically the sample complexity bound. Right, the reason for sample complexity is obvious, because we are bounding the number of samples required to achieve this error, right? So that's why it's called sample complexity bound. And this term is called generalization bound. It's called generalization bound because we are giving a bound on the true error, right? With respect to given number of data points, right? So we saw this, that if we have a small hypothesis space, then there could be a high bias, right? But what it means by high bias is that the training error is large, right? So this means that the training error itself would be large. Can someone tell me what would this be? Would it be overfitting or underfitting? Underfitting, yes, exactly, right? So this is essentially underfitting. Okay, but on the other hand, the variance will be low. So what it means is that when we are underfitting, we would expect that the test and the training error are close by to each other, right? And that's what we see in practice as well. On the other hand, when H is very large, right, you have low bias because there are many good hypotheses. So your training error would be low, right? So that means that the training error would be low, right? But you have a high variance. So that means that the test error could be high. So again, it could be high. So it's not necessarily that it will be high, but it could be high. Okay. So it's an indication that we are overfitting, right? Another thing, of course, to keep in mind is that the theoretical bounds are often loose. So any of these inequalities, whether it's Hofding inequalities, union bound, Chernoff inequalities, okay, any of these inequalities are unfortunately oftentimes loose, and there's nothing much better you can say, actually, unfortunately. So even though we know that these generalization bounds are not tight, people have been trying very hard over the last 20 years, 25 years to give conditions under which you can maybe make this slightly tighter. Still, there is a pretty large gap, right? And even under conditions where people have shown somewhat tight results, those are maybe more simple scenarios. So for the more complicated machine learning models, we oftentimes really cannot see anything theoretically, right? But having said that, it's still a very significant result that this even exists, right? Okay, so now this brings us back to VC dimension, right? So VC dimension, like towards the end of this last lecture, we relaxed one assumption, right? So we don't require zero training error anymore. So we could use the Hofding inequality, and using Hofding, we can get a somewhat weaker, but still, kind of a generalization bound that exists, right? And now we basically relax the second assumption, right? That the number of hypotheses is finite. Okay, so we kind of don't make any assumption here on the number of hypotheses, right? But really, in some sense, we want to kind of still be able to show a bound, and a kind of critical thing over here would be, in some sense, depending on the geometry of the hypothesis. Okay, so this is the notion of VC dimension, and VC dimension is going to be this quantity that is going to be able to give us that's going to be able to give us a quantity, right? So if we can get the VC dimension for a particular model and for a particular dimension, then that will basically give us be able to give us a kind of similar bound to what we saw previously, right? All right. So essentially, any of these models, right? So linear models, decision trees, neural networks, all of these scenarios would have essentially infinite number of hypotheses, right? But the reason why the hypothesis the number of hypotheses is infinite is because, in some sense, the size of the hypothesis, like each hypothesis can be seen as one parameterization, right? So one choice of a parameter. So so basically, given this, right, we can potentially have an infinite number of possible parameter choices that can be taken, right? And if, for example, this is a d-dimensional, so suppose basically theta is a d-dimensional quantity, right? Then then basically you have the entire r raised to d space as the choice of possible hypothesis. Okay, so the VC dimension is going to be relying on certain geometric properties. Okay, so in some sense, this property is going to be trying to analyze how many points are can be correctly classified using a linear separator. So essentially, what we mean over here is that how many points in one dimension for any possible choice of assignment, right, of plus and minus. So suppose we kind of assume again that we're going to start with just binary classification. Okay, so what are all the possible configurations of plus and minus, right, such that if I'm given 2 points, then I will be able to linearly separate them, right? In other words, can I find a linear separator, or can I find a hypothesis H belonging to my class of linear models, such that for any assignment of these 2 points, I should be able to get zero training error. Okay, so we saw that, okay, if I have plus and minus, I can draw a separator that lies in between, and this will give me zero training error. If I have 2 points like this, which are both plus, I can draw a separator either over here, or I could even draw a separator over here, right? Or I could draw a separator over here. So whatever be the separator, it would separate this, right? But on the other hand, this would not be a possible separator. This would not be a valid separator, right? Because it's not separating the pluses and the minuses. In fact, it is having a plus on both sides. So this is not a valid linear separator, right? But this and this and this are valid linear separators, right? So essentially, as long as there exists a linear separator that can separate the 2 points, we are good. Okay, so in this case also we are good, right? Similarly, if now I have my negative on this side and my positive on this side, again, I have something that lies in between. I can also have this, I can also have this, right? All of these are valid linear separators. Okay. Okay, so now what happens if I increase the number of points, right? So we saw that in one dimension, if we have 2 points, we are good. Okay, so what this means is that the VC dimension of H is greater than equal to 2. Okay, so this we showed because we can come up with also. So by the way, we actually missed one case, which is like minus minus, and minus minus also can be linearly separated like this, right? So because there are just 2 points, both are minus, as long as the separating hyperplane does not lie in between those 2 points, we are good, right? So all of these are valid linear separators. Okay, so now what happens if we have 3 points, right? So, all right, so again, I have the scenario. This is a good linear separator, so is this, right? So all of these are valid linear separators. They separate the negative from the positives, okay? Again, linear separator just for the training data. So as long as I have a consistent hypothesis, right? Or as long as I have a scenario with 0 training error, that's what we care about, right? So we just need to find separators that can give 0 training error. All right. So with 3 points now, on the other hand, if there are 3 points that actually lie on a straight line, right? Then this would actually not be a valid scenario, right? So if I have 3 points now, and these 3 points basically all, and this is again one dimensional, right? So this is the same 3 points, by the way. So this is something to keep in mind, right? So the same 3 points that line in a straight line, because it's only one dimensional, right? So there's no other axis in which I can put those points. Is just one dimensional, so it has to all lie in a straight line, right? So this is one configuration where I have my negative first and the 2 positives, but in this configuration, right, where I have the negative in between the 2 positives, this is not going to be a valid scenario, right? Because I cannot find any separator, right? Whether I can consider all possible separators, just basically geometrically think about it, right? You can draw any possible linear separator that tries to separate, even if you consider this one, right? It's passing through the points, it is not really separating it. So this is also not a valid linear separator, okay? So in fact, for 3 points in one dimension, you can come up with an assignment of positives and negatives such that it would not be linearly separated. Okay. Is this clear to everyone? Yes, Nathan.
So the points, you're assigning classes to the points, but you're not moving the points around yourself, right? You're saying if you can draw a linear separator between the 3 stationary points, but you're changing.
Yes.
But no matter what assignment of class you assign to those points,
exactly.
you're able to. Okay.
Exactly. So basically, in one dimension, you pick any 3 points. Okay. Maybe this didn't come out very clearly, so I'll just repeat this again. You are only in one dimension. Okay. In one dimension, you pick any 3 points. All right. With any 3 points, you will always have this scenario where you can put the center point as the negative label and the surrounding 2 points as the positive label, right? Because it's going to be in a straight line. All the 3 points are going to be collinear because they're just in one dimension, right? So you will always have the scenario where you can put the center point to be a negative label, right? And this assignment, without having to move the points, or in fact, another way to say it, as I said, right, is that given any configuration of 3 points, you can find this assignment with the negative label in the center, which does not get shattered. So what I mean by shattered is that there does not exist a linear separator that can separate these 3 points. So that's the reason why the VC dimension in just one dimension, right? The VC dimension is actually strictly less than 3, right? So we saw that the VC dimension is greater than or equal to 2, because if you have 2 points in one dimension, For any configuration, you will be able to shatter it. Okay. But it is strictly less than 3, which implies that the VC dimension has to be 2 in one dimension. Okay. So we have not come yet to a concrete definition of VC dimension, right? But just intuitively, you can see where I'm headed with this, right? So in fact, this will hold for 3 points. So because it does not hold for 3 points in one dimension, right? You increase the number of points, you add one more, you will be easily able to come up with a scenario, whatever be the sign of this guy, it doesn't matter, right? You will always come up with a scenario where you will not be able to shatter it, right? So that's the reason why the VC dimension here in a 1D scenario is going to be 2. Okay, so concretely, this is the definition of the VC dimension. Okay, so a set of so actually before that we'll just go over the definition of being shattered. Okay, so a set of points is shattered by a hypothesis space H if and only if for every partition of the set of points into positive and negative examples. So what I mean by every partition here is that every assignment of the set of points into positive and negative examples, right? There exists some consistent hypothesis H in H. So again, what we mean by some consistent hypothesis is that there exists a hypothesis which will give a zero cleaning error. Okay. So is this definition clear to everyone? Any questions with this definition? So this is a definition of being shattered. Right? Now the VC dimension or the Vapnik-Chervonenkis dimension of H is, over inputs from X is the size of the largest finite subset of X that is shattered by H. Okay, so what this means is that as long as there exists even one subset of points, okay, of this size, of the size D. So it's not that every subset needs to be shattered. Okay, so this is critical. It's not that every subset needs to be shattered. As long as there exists one subset which is shattered by H, and that subset is basically of this size D, right? Then the VC dimension is at least D. Okay. So this is critical, right? Again, so now consider, so like previously we looked at one dimension, right? Now consider the case of two-dimensional data. Suppose you have two-dimensional data, right? So I think this will precisely highlight this kind of very fine point that I was trying to make in the last slide. Okay, so a common misconception is that the VC dimension is so the VC dimension is actually determined by the largest shattered set of points, not the highest number of points, such that all sets of points of that size can be shattered. So we don't need to check every possible configuration, right? And it's not that every possible set of configuration needs to be shattered. As long as there exists one configuration which is shattered, the VC dimension is at least that. Okay. So to kind of make things more concrete. Okay. So this is x2, this is x1, right? This is a two-dimensional scenario, right? But if I have a set of points that lie in a straight line, right? You might be tempted to say that the VC dimension here also cannot be 3, right? Because even in 2 dimensions, right, you have basically these two positives, right? And now essentially you cannot kind of come up with any, even in 2 dimensions, right? You cannot draw any straight line that can separate these two. Okay. So does that mean that the VC dimension in a 2D case, right, of this hypothesis, which is the class of all linear separators, is this strictly less than 3? Well, no, right? So this is where this point gets highlighted, because you can come up with another set of 3 points, right, where for any configuration of these 3 points, we would be able to actually shatter it. Okay, so for any partition or any assignment, right? So take these 3 points. So now let's maybe enumerate, right? So this is negative plus plus, you can obviously shatter it. Okay, if I have plus plus minus, again I can shatter it. Okay, if I have plus plus minus, again I can shatter it, right? And so on and so forth. So you can actually work out now. Well, actually, since okay, so here you could also work out the scenarios where you have like all three pluses, all three minuses, all three pluses, all three minuses. Obviously, you can shatter it, right? And since you can kind of flip between the positives and the negatives, you can see that if you have like the scenario with like say negative negative plus, you can shatter this, right? Similarly, negative negative plus, you can shatter this, and negative negative plus, again you can shatter this. So basically there are 9 possible scenarios, right? And every possible scenario you can actually shatter. Sorry, there are actually 8 possible scenarios, not 9. And the other 2 scenarios left are just plus 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 and minus minus minus, right? And both of them can be shattered. Okay. So even though this subset of points, right, this subset of points cannot be shattered, this subset of points can be shattered, right? So basically VC dimension just asks for an existence. As long as there exists something that can be shattered, we know that in 2 dimension the VC dimension so it's kind of getting repetitive here, right? VC dimension in 2 dimension, but anyways, the VC dimension in the 2D case is actually going to be greater than equal to 3, right? Because these 3 points can be shattered. Any questions with this? Or is this clear? Okay, I think hopefully things are clear. Okay, so it's at least 3, right? Is what we saw. So the VC dimension in the 2D case is at least 3. Now, well, I mean, yeah, Nathan, go ahead.
So I'm actually still confused about the 2D case. Say you have the collinear points again with the basically the case that showed that the VC dimension one. Yeah, so that again, so can you explain again how the VC dimension here is going to be greater than or equal to 3?
No, so the VC dimension is not a function of the number of points. The VC dimension is a function of the dimensionality of the data and the hypothesis. So for the VC dimension, so it's not that the VC dimension is going to be different in this case versus different in this case. Does it make sense? So the VC dimension, right? The VC dimension does not ask that every possible set of points should be shattered. The VC dimension just asks that as long as at least one set of points in a dimensionality D is shattered, right? Sorry, one set of points of size D is shattered, right? Then the VC dimension is at least D. Does it make sense?
If you were able to pick some arbitrary set
exactly
in that dimension, and there are, say, D number of points in that set, then the VC dimension has to be at least that number.
Assuming that set can be shattered.
Okay.
If that set can be shattered, then, that's why VC dimension is about existential. Is about existence. As long as there exists one set of size B that can be shattered, right? Then the VC dimension is at least D.
Okay.
Okay, so there's this question, still confused of how about in 1D case. Okay, so what's your question about the 1D case? So for the 1D case, yeah. Or plus plus minus minus. So okay, so actually there are two things. Okay, so maybe I'll just highlight this. So suppose given dimensionality n. Okay, so n is a dimension. It's not d. N is a dimension, right? So in this case, so basically like n equal to 1 in 1D case. Okay, so given a dimensionality n, right? The VC dimension of a hypothesis in this dimensionality n, the VC dimension of hypothesis H, okay, is greater than equal to D if, point number 1, there exists a set. C of points, and C basically is a subset of R raised to n. Okay, so that means that there exists a set of points C of size D such that C is shattered by H. Okay, and number two, okay, every so actually I'll say that the VC dimension is equal to D if there exists a set C of points. And actually, I think your question, Xianxi, can I pronounce your name as Xianxi? I think I'm not sure how to pronounce your name exactly. Okay, thank you. So your question will be answered a little later. Then I'll tell you exactly what I mean by shatter. Okay, but I'm just trying to emphasize it again because this is important. Okay, so VC dimension is equal to D if there exists a set C of points of size D, size of so basically this means that the size of C is equal to D. Okay, so that C is shattered by H, right? And for every set C prime of size D plus 1, C prime cannot shatter, or C prime cannot be shattered by H. Okay, so here is basically there exists, right? And here we need to check every possible set of C prime. Okay, so now let us again revisit the 1D case. Okay, so revisit the 1D case. 1D case, right? So in the 1D case, we check point number 1, right? So there exists a set of 2 points. So here we just need existential, right? So we just give basically any 2 points over here, okay, in one-dimensional space, any 2 points, okay. Now you give all possible configurations of these 2 points, okay. So you give basically plus plus, plus minus, minus plus, minus minus, right? We check that all four conditions you can actually shatter, okay. So there exists a set of 2 points which can be shattered by H, right? And then point number 2, now for every set of 3 points, right? And without loss of generality, these 3 points, you can take these 3, I mean, obviously in 1D, these 3 points will be lying in 1 dimension, right? So for every set of 3 points, H cannot shatter these 3 points. Okay, so now critical over here is the definition of shatter. In the definition of shatter, we require that for every configuration of points, right, we have to be able to linearly separate. So Xianxi, I think the example that you gave, okay, is one particular configuration where you can shatter it. That's not enough for VC dimension. By the definition of shatter, you need to be able to do this for every configuration, right? So that means that you can take every configuration over here, okay? So just I think there are 8 configurations, right? So this is going to be minus plus minus, plus minus plus, minus minus plus, and so on and so forth. Okay, maybe somewhere there is plus plus plus, minus minus minus. There are even more. Okay. So now what we know is that this configuration can be shattered. This is good. Okay. This configuration cannot be shattered. Likewise, this configuration cannot be shattered. This configuration can. This configuration, right? So these are the 2 configurations that cannot be shattered. Okay. But even if there exists one configuration that cannot be linearly separated, right? We say that this cannot be shattered. So actually, I should not use the word shatter. For this configuration, we cannot find a linear separator, right? So essentially, for this configuration, these 2 configurations, right, we cannot find a linear separator. And this is irrespective of the set of points. So for every set of points, we can come up with this configuration such that we cannot linearly separate these 3 points. Okay, you can do it for the rest. So out of 8, you can do it in 6 configurations, but you can't do it in 2. But because we can't linearly separate in 2 cases, we say that that these 3 points cannot be shattered by edge. Does it make sense? Does it answer your question? Shreyanshi, does it answer your question? Okay, thank you. Okay, so all right, so we saw this, we saw this. Okay, so there's one more question. For the same edge, such as linear separator, can we have different VC dimension for 1D? Yes, yes, yes. So the VC dimension will depend on the inherent dimensionality of the data. So the VC dimension will be different based on the dimensionality. So in fact, we'll give a result of the VC dimension for linear separator very soon for linear classifiers. Okay, so stay tuned. Okay, so we saw that the VC dimension is going to be at least 3, right? In the 2D case. Now, what about 4? Well, so for 4, we can come up with the same thing, right? So for 4, again, you see that this scenario can be linearly separated, right? So these 4 points, this particular configuration of 4 points can be linearly separated. But what about this configuration of 4 points? Unfortunately, right, you take any configuration, right, you take any linear separator, you will not be able to separate this. Even this is not a valid linear separator, nor is this, right? You just draw arbitrary linear separators, you will see that you cannot actually separate this, okay? So this point, this particular configuration cannot be linearly separated. Okay. Moreover, it is not just specific to this set of 4 points, any set of 4 points. Okay. So you arbitrarily draw any set of 4 points, right? You can come up with a labeling where you assign basically negatives to these two, right? And then you assign positives to these two. You'll have the same story. Okay. So maybe I will make this a little bit more clear. So this is like negatives, right? And this is positives. Okay. So it's the same scenario. These 4 points cannot be linearly separated because you draw any linear separator like this, anything, right? It is not linearly separated. So again, right, what this means is that in 2 dimension, I'm confused with the term configuration. So configuration means configuration of labels or assignment of positives and negatives. Yes. So in some sense, it's a partition. It's a partition of the labels, right? Or it's a configuration of the labels, or basically an assignment, whatever you want to call it. So it is for every possible assignment of positive and negative labels to this set of points, I should be able to linearly separate it for every possible configuration. Okay. And then further you can notice, like as I said, that this is not specific to just these 4 points. Any set of 4 points, right, would not be linearly separated on this plane, right? Because it's just 2D. Had it been 3D, it would be a different scenario, right? But this is just 2 dimension. So again, right, this is again the same set of 4 points here, but this is like much different from the previous set. Again, this configuration cannot be linearly separated. Okay. So what this means is that this is the general result of dimensionality D. Okay. So there exists a set of size D plus 1 in a D-dimensional space that can be shattered by a linear separator, but not a set of size a set of size D plus 2. Okay. So what this means is that the VC dimension of dimensionality D, right, of H, which is basically the class of linear separators, is going to be D plus 1. Okay. So this is consistent with what we saw in the 1D and the 2D cases, right? So in the 1D case, we saw the VC dimension is 2. In the 2D case, we saw the VC dimension is 3, right? And the same can be proven for D plus 1 dimension. Again, I'm not going to draw it in D plus 1 dimension. You can give a very similar argument. somewhat combinatorial, right? But still, you can actually show that you can come up with an assignment such that it cannot be shattered. Okay. So this is a very important result, right? Because this now gives, in some sense, a general result of the VC dimension of a very large class of models, which is the linear, the class of linear models, right, or linear separators. So the larger the subset X that can be shattered, the more expressive the hypothesis space is, right? So this is very intuitive, right? So it's kind of makes sense because the more the basically the kind of larger the subset X is, the better the model is able to actually separate it, right? So if you have a restricted model, so in some sense the limitation of linear separators comes from the fact that it is actually a very restricted class of models, right? We make it richer, and we can actually get even better VC dimensions. Okay, so we look at a few more examples of slightly richer models. The next few slides. Okay, so if arbitrary large finite, okay, so we say that the VC dimension of H is infinite if you can basically show that you have a set X of any size and that can be shattered by our model, right? So there are actually several classes of models, nonlinear models, which actually have infinite VC dimension. Okay, so we look at a little bit more involved scenario, right? We look at the class of axis parallel rectangles. Okay, so we have the axis parallel rectangles here. So I'm claiming that the VC dimension is at least 4 for this in 2 dimensions. Can someone tell me why? How you would actually show this? Anyone? How will you prove that the VC dimension is at least 4? Yes, Nathan.
So, well, at least for the locations of those points, you can go through all possible assignments for those points.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, you should be able to draw a rectangle on the positive set of points for every configuration. So you've shown that there's a set of points of size D, in this case 4, that can be shattered, or such that H shatters those points. So for at least that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? So basically you have these two scenarios, right? And you can actually work out, obviously you'll have many scenarios, but you can kind of see the symmetry going on over here, right? So you'll have either a scenario like this, or you'll have a scenario like this where the positives are adjacent and the negatives are adjacent, right? Or the positives and negatives are opposite. Or you could have more positives, right? So you could have like 3 positives and 1 negative, right? So again, if this is a scenario, you have something like this, right? And obviously, if you have all 4 positives, then you can just, you have all 4 positives or all 4 negatives, then you just draw a rectangle like this. If you have all 4 negatives, then you draw the rectangle somewhere else, right? So you can actually work out in this, looking at all possible assignments, and show that in the simple 2D case, right, the VC dimension is at least 4. Now, what happens if you have a 1D scenario? What will be the VC dimension? Will 4 points? So if you have these 4 points, right? Can these 4 points be shattered? What do you think? Can these 4 points be shattered if like all 4 points belong to one line? Still in the 2D case, let's assume that this 2D. So you still have rectangles. Can these 4 points be shattered by a rectangle? Yeah, Nathan.
In this case, no. You can repeat the first example we saw in the one-dimensional case where you
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. So like so suppose you have like even these two being negative, and then like say these two being positive, or even this if this is positive, there's no way to draw a rectangle that can separate this, right? But even if these 4 points cannot be shattered, right? We don't require every set of 4 points to be shattered by a rectangle, right? So that's key. Again, I'm trying to highlight this. As long as there exists one set of 4 points that can be shattered, we are good for the BC dimension. Okay. So, all right. So in the 2D case, we look at the axis aligned rectangles, and this definitely seems to have a larger BC dimension compared to just the straight line. Now, what happens if we take 5 points, right? So 5 points. Uh, so obviously, like this has to be argued for every set of 5 points, right? But you can kind of think through this symmetrically, and you can see that you can have any arbitrary set of 5 points. You will always have a scenario where one of the points is in between, right, or somewhere in middle that can be written as a combination of these other 4 points, right? And this point that is in between, right, would always be the point which would be incorrectly classified by a rectangle, right? So there's no way to draw a rectangle such that this configuration can be shattered, right? For every configuration, and particularly this particular configuration can be separated, right? So that means that given these 5 points, this cannot be shattered. This cannot be shattered by the class of axis aligned. Can you guys hear me? Hello?
You cut out for like 20 seconds there, or at least for me.
Yeah. So I think I had some network issue. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can still see the screen.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's work out a few examples. Okay. So if you have a set of one level decision trees over real vectors of length 2, right? Then what will be so basically one level decision trees is nothing but this, right? So you have essentially, so this is like one dimension, right? So you have like some dimension, some feature xk less than equal to a threshold, and then you split this, right, into two classes. So in the two-dimensional scenario, can someone tell me what will be the VC dimension for this? What would these, geometrically speaking, what would the one level decision trees look like? Yes, Nathan.
Well, as far as how the decision tree would look like, it would be just the vertical or horizontal line.
Okay.
And then, so I suppose from there you can treat those as linear separators in 2D space and then ask.
Are they exactly linear separators? Are they the class of linear separators? They are different, right?
Yeah, they're slightly different because you're restricted on their slope.
So they are restricted in one sense and they are more powerful in another, right? Because okay, no, not exactly more powerful. Here they are restricted, right? Because they can only be um, either parallel to the x-axis or parallel to the y-axis, right? So can we come up with a config? Okay, so in 2 dimensions, right? If I have 2 dimensions, can they this decision tree separate them in 2 dimensions? Can will the hypothesis class of decision trees shatter sorry, I didn't mean 2 dimensions. I mean here the dimensionality is 2, right? So D is equal to 2. Can 2 points be shattered by a decision tree? Yes, they can, right? Because, by the way, I hope the others are also following, because please do ask questions if you are not following something. Okay. So if you have like, take all the configurations, right? So if you have plus plus, then obviously you can just draw a decision tree like this, right? Or if you have like a minus plus, then you just draw it in between, right? Or if you have a plus minus, again you draw it in between, and minus minus symmetrically, right? Draw it somewhere else. So 2 points can be shattered. Okay. Now, what about 3? So basically take any 3 points. Okay. Can 3 points be shattered by the class of axis? Um, sorry, by the class of decision trees, by the hypothesis class of decision trees. So in particular, take these 3 points, right? Will these 3 points be shattered? Okay, why not these 3?
If you take the ones on the edges to be positive, for example, and the one that'll be negative, you can't find any decision boundary which will separate it.
Correct, precisely, yes. So if this one is say negative, right? So if this one is negative and these two are positive, right? Then you cannot draw any separator which is axis aligned. I mean, you can draw a linear separator, right? But you can't draw a axis aligned separator, right? So these 3 points cannot, but you can actually come up with a set of 3 points which actually can be. Okay. So it turns out that the VC dimension here is 3. Maybe you can think about this actually offline. What would be the set? Actually, maybe does anyone have any idea? Any thoughts? Which set of 3 points would be good for this? Anyone? Maybe we can take a couple of seconds, think about it. The reason by the way, I'm asking these questions because there will be a lot of homework and a lot of midterm and I'm not midterm, midterm is over, but a lot of end term and QE exam questions that will be like this, right? So it's important. Yeah.
Yeah, for the VC dimension 3, something like a horizontal rectangle. I mean horizontal triangle.
Okay.
That can be shattered.
You mean something like this?
Like that rotated by 90 degrees and the bottom point like slightly offset.
Do you mean this or?
Yeah, so okay.
Yeah, I think any of
I could
these.
draw it and show, but
Yeah, I think any of these would actually work, right? Because you can think of a scenario like this, which is like minus minus plus, then you can actually draw a decision boundary that basically is in between these two, right? So you can draw something like this that goes in between these two. Imagine a scenario where this one is negative and these two are positive, and then you can draw something like this, right? And vice versa. So yeah, so basically something like this, right? So you want to be able to think of different scenarios where you can come up with points, and as long as again it's key, right? The key is that as long as there exists a set of 3 points, such that every configuration or every assignment of positives and negatives can um, can be separated by this hypothesis, right? Then we are good. Okay. Yeah, Nathan.
So I'm looking at the definition for the VC dimensions again. It specifically mentions inputs from X. In this case, are we assuming X has been Rn?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, X is the set of all possible feature vectors, right? So X basically X belongs to X. So like in general, you can say that this is like R raised to n, for example. If your features can take every possible value in R raised to n, then it's R raised to n.
Okay, but which is what we've been doing this entire time, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes. R raised to n or R raised to d, right? Whatever. So basically this is a subset of R raised to d. Okay. All right. So this is fine. Okay. So this is 3. What is the VC dimension of the linear separators to the origin? What would this be? So this is again the class of linear separator, right? But it's only constrained to be belonging to the origin. Why is it 2? Well, the same thing probably, right? So you have any 2 points, okay? Or actually here you don't need any 2 points as long as there exist 2 points, right? So you can basically come up with a scenario where you have 2 points like this, and say these 2 points can be separated, okay? Again, there will be 2 points which cannot be separated by axis align, basically lines that pass through the origin, right? But that's not important for VC dimension. So two points can be shattered, okay? But then if you go to, in the 3-dimensional case, right? So then you go through any configuration of points, right? However you want to draw it. So here it's a little bit more tricky because you need to make sure that the origin, you can basically move the origin anywhere, right? So this origin can be moved anywhere, and like you basically will need to give an argument, reasonable argument, such that the origin can be moved anywhere, but still, you cannot linearly separate it, right? So imagine the origin is over here, then you can easily come up with a configuration such that, like, say, if this particular point is like, I mean, if these two are positives and this is negative, right? Then this cannot be separated. Obviously, this is just one possible. So actually, these 3 points may not lie a line, so this point could lie anywhere, right? So anyways, you'll have to make a little bit more kind of complicated arguments to make sure that that's the case. But in some sense, like a simple way to think about this is that when you have a linear separator passing through the origin, it is somewhat restricted, right? You are kind of restricting it further because you don't have this additional bias term that is there. So in some sense, one of the main reasons why you have d+1 for linear separators is because there are d+1 parameters, okay, for a d-dimensional data, right? So if this is like d-dimensional, then the VC dimension is d+1. So it's not always true that the number of parameters is equal to the VC dimension. In fact, there are actually scenarios, there are actually models that people have come up with where the number of parameters is actually not equal to the VC dimension. In fact, you have a finite number of parameters, but the VC dimension is actually infinite. So there are scenarios like this. But oftentimes you will actually see that the VC dimension is related to the number of parameters. Okay, so here in this case, the VC dimension is actually d, and in some sense, this is because there are d parameters. So you don't have this additional bias term. So again, it's not a reason for VC dimension being d. Number of parameters is not a sufficient argument. You have to argue this using shattering. Okay, so another scenario is if you have exactly one hypothesis. Okay, so if you have exactly one hypothesis and you have binary vectors, then what is the VC dimension? Any idea? So essentially, you have like one hypothesis H that you are given with, right? And this hypothesis can be anything. So for any given one hypothesis, what will be the VC dimension? How will you show something like this, right? So, well, you can come up with a very kind of basic hypothesis, right? So imagine your hypothesis of H is exactly equal to 1, right, for all X. So you're always predicting 1, right? Then even if you have one example, right, if you have one data point, if this one data point has a positive label, right, it cannot be shattered. Does it make sense? So that's the reason why in this scenario the VC dimension is actually 0. Okay. In general, actually there is a result that actually connects the VC dimension with finite hypothesis spaces and says that the VC dimension of H is actually less than equal to log 2 of size of H. Okay. So this is actually an upper bound, that the VC dimension is always less than equal to log 2 of size of H. So in fact, this actually kind of connects the VC dimension with the result we saw earlier, right? If you remember earlier, we had this logarithmic factor in the generalization bound, right? So we had something like log H. So we had something like epsilon test is less than epsilon true plus square root of 1 over 2m log 2 size of H plus log plus, can't remember actually, it was 1 over delta or log 1 over delta, I think log 1 over delta, something like this, right? So it was depending on the log of the size of the hypothesis space, right? And in some sense we see that the VC dimension is actually kind of lower bounded by, so basically log 2 of H is an upper bound on the VC dimension, okay? So this suggests that we should be able to give a generalization bound with VC dimension as well. So it turns out that we can. Okay. As I said, it's a much more involved proof. So this is the sample complexity bound. Okay. So the sample complexity bound says that m is greater than or equal to 1 over epsilon, right? Multiplied by 4 log 2 by delta. So this is like the log 1 over delta kind of term, right? Plus 8 multiplied by the VC dimension of H multiplied by log 13 over epsilon. Okay, so anyways, I think these are like these kind of numbers come as an artifact of the proof that was used. Again, we're not going to prove it. Okay, but this is the sample complexity bound that you can show, right? And this is again related, somewhat related to this log H bound, right? Again, like there is a similar complexity, sample complexity bound when this is log H, right? So this is related, but this is not exactly the case. And there is a generalization bound, right? So this is the generalization bound, and this says that this epsilon H is less than equal to epsilon H train, right? So this is the training error plus this additional factor. Okay, so this additional factor is 1 over a square root 1 over m VC dimension of H multiplied by log 2m divided by VC dimension of H plus 1 plus log 4 over delta. Okay? So it's a very similar bound, just that instead of now the log 2h factor that was there, we have replaced it with the VC dimension. Okay, but the nice thing is that we now can actually show this bound even for this much richer class of models that actually don't necessarily have finite number of hypotheses, but have finite VC dimension. So as long as the VC dimension is finite and bounded, you can show this generalization bound. So I think this in itself is actually a very powerful learning theory result. So I cannot emphasize actually how powerful this result is, right? Because for the first time, whenever this result was shown by Vapnik, Sherwan, and Kiss, it's incredibly powerful, and I mean there's like an entire subfield of machine learning now dedicated to these two gentlemen, who have shown this result. So it's a very nice, neat result, which for the first time actually shows that provably machine learning will work, right? So it means that as long as you are actually minimizing the training error, and show something that will generalize the true, that will minimize the true error, right? Of course, albeit the fact that you require this IID assumption is a very important assumption for this, right? Oftentimes real world data may not be IID. So, I mean, given all of this, right? Of course, there has been a lot of work now where people have been looking at similar results in a non-IID scenario in the case of distribution shift, domain shift, and so on and so forth, right? But leaving that fact aside, what this is saying is that with the training error, if the training error is low, we can show a result that says that with given enough number of samples, you can also have a low test error. Okay. So so I think with this actually we're almost done. I think this is the last two slides. So this is basically a setting of pack learning, right? So we are given a kind of data set X, we are given a hypothesis space, we are given a set of target concept C, right? And training instances from an unknown distribution in the form of X comma C of X, right? So this is basically the set of labels, right? And the goal here is to learn this target concept C. Okay, so this is a standard supervised learning, but but when sometimes this is in the pack learning scenario, right? So what the pack learning says is that given this, we say that C is pack learnable by L, which is a learner. So basically L is a learner and H is a hypothesis space. So essentially we have defined, so we have this set X, which is a set of all possible inputs, right? Or features, okay? And this is the hypothesis space. So this is the model, right? And set of concepts here essentially is this, in some sense you can think of this like some kind of a label or like labeling function, right? Or maybe target function. So C of X basically is this target function, okay? So given this set of concepts or labels, right, and I have my training instances, what pack learning says is that that this is pack learnable by the learning algorithm L using H if for all distributions over X. Okay, so this says that if we consider all possible probability distributions. Okay, so this is all possible probability distribution, joint distributions between X comma Y. Okay, for all possible distributions, if the learner is able to sample n instances, then with probability at least 1 over delta, we can obtain a hypothesis H such that epsilon H is less than equal to epsilon, right? And the running time of the algorithm is polynomial in 1 over epsilon, 1 over delta, n, and size of C. Okay, so size of C is in some sense number of labels, right? So in number of labels, number of data points, 1 over delta and 1 over epsilon, we have a polynomial time learning algorithm that can guarantee low training error. Okay, so this is basically the pack learning setting that builds upon this. Okay, so I mean this is just a kind of more theoretical and formal statement, but it's basically saying the same thing that we have kind of discussed through this lecture. Okay, so I think we are done. This is the last slide, and we can actually end here. So, are there any questions?